and associate symbolism with this particular text. So before understanding what a visual consumer is or how they are constructed, we need to understand something basic or fundamental for this concept. So the specific ways in which we see and represent the world determine how we act upon the world, and doing so create what that world is. This was a phrase taken from a person called, an author called Nakul. What he says here is what we see and what we visualize does not only determines how we act upon what we see and we do, but it also determines how we create the world around us based on our reactions to what we see. So, who a visual consumer is? So, the basic emphasis is on understanding the role of visuals in consumer meaning making and consumption. When we see something or when we visualize something, people associate meanings to that. So, understanding that meaning-making process becomes critical in constructing the visual consumer. And this is as much about how researchers inscribe the consumer as it is about how the consumers inscribe themselves. So, this is not a single point of view, single perspective. We are not talking just about what the researchers think of what a consumer or a community is or how it behaves. It also talks about how the community or consumer himself thinks about himself. Thinks about him. So, there are basically two concepts here, way of being a consumer and way of viewing the consumers in consumption. So, here the emphasis is on the visual skills and abilities of the consumers. So, that talks about what a consumer is or what he consumes. What he consumes is basically the visual interpretation or visual images that he sees, how he perceives those visual images and how he categorizes and interprets these images and acts on these visuals. This actually leads to a novel form of illiteracy, wherein when people fail to recognize or fail to fully understand the meaning-making process behind a particular visual, what happens is there is a social misrecognition and alienation that happens for that particular individual from the entire community. So he fails to understand the exact concept of what a particular thing means, what a particular ritual is actually for. And ways of viewing a consumer consumption is about conscious meaning making, viewing consumers as a conscious meaning making entities. So this begins with a set of ideas. Researchers have a set of ideas about what a consumer is and what he actually does. Yeah, and there is an explicit attention to the ways in which consumers choose to construct themselves. So that is very important in this context. So here we see an experiment made by Dow, where they try to bring out the differences between how consumers see themselves and how others see a particular individual. So this was done by an artist. On the left side we see how a person views themselves, and on the right side we see how a person is described by a random stranger. So and we see that there is a lot of difference between these two images. So this is the basic fundamental idea behind the entire concept of visual consumers. So how are visual consumers constructed? There are two basic views to this. One is the academic construction, another one is the corporate construction. The fundamental agenda behind these two is pretty much the same, but the goals for them actually varies. The goal for constructing a visual consumer in the academic sense is to actually develop a literary work that will actually contribute to a scholarly discipline or an academic degree. But in the case of a corporate construction of visual ethnography, we are trying to develop knowledge streams to actually gain some strategic insights that will actually help us push our product more or increase our sales or revenues. In the academic construction, what we try to do is we try to direct the attention to a phenomena that is overlooked by just the mere seeing and recording events. We try to direct attention to that particular phenomena, and we employ visual data to support these new insights. And this is usually carried over a long period of time, as opposed to corporate construction, which is for a very short period of time for a particular strategic goal. Here what we are trying to say is there is an intervention, there is a reaction to what we see. So this is is to transcend written report and challenge dominant organizational views. What this means is that when you are actually constructing a visual consumer through this corporate point of view, we are trying to go beyond the written report or written dominant organizational views of what we think a consumer or an employee should be, and try to understand what these consumers perceive themselves to be, so that we can act upon that perception and bring out more productive force in a product. This productive force is nothing but the actual value given or added by the product or service. So how this is done is by creating a platform for these consumers to interact between themselves, to see the ritual activities that they engage in, the social cultural practices that they engage in, and to witness the host of symbolic associations and meaning making firsthand. When you do that firsthand, what happens is you can actually understand visually how these interactions happen between the consumers, and this helps you further understand or analyze the perceptions of the consumers themselves. So this is a simple example how a visual image or a picture can reinforce a particular idea in this case, or actually enable you to intervene with the world wherein it asks you to ask a call to action basically. In the first image, what we see is that they are asking us to use electricity wisely, wherein this actually makes you think that you can, by a simple act of switching off lights or at home or at work, you can save or conserve electricity. This actually changes the perception of how you can live in your own home or work. And this one actually reinforces a particular product given by DHL, which says that for all your heavyweight shipments, you can approach DHL. And there is a huge hoarding with all these concrete or steel supports. So the final idea behind constructing a visual consumer is this. It's not just an ethical way of understanding the role of a visual, but it is a fundamental prerequisite in generating new consumer insights, be it both academic or corporate.
Good evening everyone. As Nandita has already explained that our topic is about interpreting visual inputs and develop them into some useful consumer visual construct, which can be useful for developing academic material or for developing corporate strategy. To further illustrate this viewpoint, I'll explain two examples. The first example is real-time blood sugar monitor. The monitors which were produced initially by the companies, they were complex and it was not easy for the patients to use them. So there was a gap between the developer's output and the customer's expectation. So what the developers did, they conducted a research where the researchers actually spent one whole day with the patients, and they actually tried to understand the difficulties they were facing. And then they understood actually there is a huge gap because it was not convenient for them to use those monitors because it requires high maintenance, and they actually need to use it a number of times in a day, so it's difficult for them, and there were many complex functionalities which were never used by the patients because they were not able to use it. So here lies the insight. There is no point of producing something which is not required by the customers. So these insights were carried forward by the researchers to the developers, and this leads to the development of the present simple disposable blood sugar monitors, which just gives you the blood sugar, which just calculates the blood sugar without providing any complex functionalities. And our next example is about the development of the modern parking lots. The earlier parking lots were not planned properly, and there were no proper segregation. So as more and more technology develop, more and more vehicles come. So they were not efficient enough to handle those vehicles, different type of vehicles. So the people who were responsible for developing the parking lots, they sent their people to the places to understand the problems the people were facing, and those researchers actually results in the multi-story parking lots that we see nowadays. So based on these examples, we develop our framework, and we do have a name for our framework, which is not just sight but vision. So I'll discuss the steps of our framework. The first step is, first we get the visual inputs, which can be in form of photographs or video records or maybe just some observations, and then we work on it. So after getting the visual inputs, we reflect upon the content and context. So content is nothing but the visual input we get, and the context is the social, economic and cultural context in which the input was received. Because why we need to do that? Because the visual input sometimes it differs based on those parameters, and then we need to negotiate among the available options to get some common ground on which we can work further. One very important thing that we always need to remove the researcher's bias, because he himself has some cultural bias and all. So we need to remove that first. For that, maybe we can take random samples, as many samples we can as we can, and the samples should be very diverse. Whenever we are doing our research work, we should compare our research work with the cross-cultural researchers. So that is the same reason, so that we can get a holistic scientific view. And after doing all this, finally we develop our visual consumer insights, which can be further used by at the academic level or at the corporate level. So as Helen Keller says that it will be foolish if we just restrict ourselves to sites. We need to develop some vision which can be helpful for the mankind.
To build on it further, we have a managerial context. As has been mentioned in our framework, the first input is the visual imagery, and then we have to remove all sorts of biases, and we have to contextualize it with the culture, and then we come up with something that is meaningful to the corporate world as well as to the categories. So the case that we have taken is that of retailers. Earlier, what used to happen, we had traditional retailers, kirana stores, mom and pop stores, where direct selling was done, where customers were not allowed to touch and feel the products. But with modern retail coming up, now the customers can actually touch and feel each of the products that are on display. So once this is due to changing socio-economic scenario, economies of scope and everything. Now the customers can actually go into the store, touch, see, feel, visualize, and they have the entire experience of shopping just by themselves. So that is where the cultural question comes in for the modern retailers. So where do we place our products? Where is it visible the most? Where will it have the most impact? And what will make the customer buy the most? So that is where our query comes in, and that is where our framework is also applicable, because the biggest input is the vision that comes in. So what was done was, this was the innovation that was adopted. They thought that we need to record and have a track of all the customers' movements as and when they enter the store, choose among the products, buy the product, and finally leave the product. Then we'll have an entire record of the consumer movements. We'll have an input into how the consumer decides his buying decision, and all over whatever the mindset that customer comes in, whatever the mindset that is influenced in the shop itself. And the result that was obtained was spectacular. We had so many insights just based on the CCTV material, and these insights are actually being used by modern retailers nowadays. The first important insight that we received was that most of the buyers who come to modern retailers, 68% of their products are not pre-decided. They come, they look at the products, and that is when they decide. So that is what was used by marketers in making those products visible, using the same shelving space, making the products visible right in the front line, making it easy for the customers to go and actually feel their products. The second biggest insight was, in India, mostly people are right-handed, while in Australia, mostly people are left-handed. So when there was an open store, Indians tended to move towards the right side, and Australians tend to move towards the left side. So that was an area which was more expensive for the marketeers to buy, and that's where they could display their products more depending on the bigger footfall size. Another most important input for Indians is, when they carry their small children to malls and to modern retail outlets, they carry their children in the shopping trolleys. So that is when the shelving arrangement comes into play. For products that attract children, they are placed at a lower shelf space where children actually feel them, see them, and coax their parents into buying this. And higher shelf stores are those products which attract women and females and adults. So that is where the visual part plays an impact in deciding how we go about the shelving. And another impact of this visual experiment was, when men wait for their better halves when they're trying on clothes in their trial rooms. So men are actually forced to read whatever is there on the wall. The walls outside the trial rooms, they are actually bored, and so they should read everything that is outside the trial room. So this space is actually very costly in case of modern Indian upgrades. So that is one insight that was obtained using our framework. That is it.